Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, Robert.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize we weren't already on.
Would you mind sharing that one more time, Representative?
Yeah, so I had looked at the code doc and um just wasn't sure exactly what we were talking about that needed to be cleaned up because it starts with some text that um had kind of an end date on it and is superseded by subsequent text. I don't know if that's what you're talking about taking out. And then the other thing that stood out to me was the education districts, which I don't know if that has any meaning anymore. It doesn't as far as I know, but I don't know.
Can you bring that up on the screen, Darren, so we can just see it as we go? I think you're muted.
I believe you're referring to this document. It's like a little laggy on my side.
Mhm.
You're referring to C numbers 1 through 4, Representative Henderson?
Yeah, so that part, and then that the first two, 1 and 2, um, or sorry, I guess just one.
So I can speak to this if you like, because I was there as we were making this up.
Yeah.
So what they'll try to do typically in DC code is if there's any sort of historical documentation of either tax rates or, uh, like in this case, the structure of the board. They'll try to keep the historical record in there of the dates of change. So rather than just, I mean, one way that it could be handled is you just repeal over it. Like every time you change a tax rate, every time you change a structure, you just repeal the old one and you put in a new one. But, in many cases, what they'll try to do is, put, as you see here, the dates that these structures were in effect, which was the initial phases of the state board when it transitioned over, and then eventually became, with the one seat per ward, and which is its current structure. So what the council will probably want to do is keep this language in there because they like to maintain the historical record of how things worked over time in the code. So I don't think, since this isn't in effect anymore, that it's problematic, but they'll probably want to keep it in. So it wouldn't be something we would try to repeal out. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
No, that's helpful. That was exactly my question. If it's fine to keep it in there because it's clear that that no longer applies.
Yeah. And I don't have a dog in the fight one way or the other. This is something that the office of the general counsel over there has usually pushed for. It kind of is a best practice on things like this. And you'll see that this all the time in like tax rates that change, just so that like if somebody's looking back to a prior tax year, they can know what the rate was during that period of time.
Okay. That makes sense. I didn't know how it was supposed to be reflected. And so that's really helpful. I think when I went in, it wasn't just the constitution of the membership. I think I had two questions. One was some of the responsibilities. So for example, it references charters, and two was the moments of response, and then the other part was the budget process, because there seems to always be a question every year as far as if our participation in the mark process, and if we have to like negotiate with the mayor, or if we should just be able to say this is what we need. And I can't remember which document it was in, but it does reference, uh, and it's maybe it's just not clear. I would be curious what other statutes say about independent offices but it does reference us like sending our budgets to the mayor.
It was in there, so if Darren could bring it up, I remember I just saw it a second ago because I was reading this through before we came in. So I don't know, Darren, if you can pull that portion of the code up that discusses that. It's a little ways down, I think on the third page, maybe.
Okay.
I know I marked it in my comments.
Oh.
Not-
Let's see here.
Oh, and then there was one about SES, that's the responsibilities, but yeah. This, our inclusion in the mark process, 3A. So like past executive directors, like I know John Paul used different language than Bernice did around like if we should be included in the mark process, and while we have had some success, which I don't take for granted, around our last few budgets, it always seems to be maybe about as clear as mud. If we even should be going through the mark process like other agencies, like OSSI does, or like DTPS does, which are agencies that do report directly to the mayor. And I'm not sure if this is like the only place that that's referenced, and I would be curious how other independent agencies, how their statutes are phrased.
So I can respond to this one too, because it was the budget director. I can explain how we handled it and how I read this, if that would be helpful, Representative Thompson.
Yes.
Okay. So on this, like it's silent on whether we have to participate in the mark process. This is just requiring us to transmit our proposed budget to the to the executive branch. Now, typically, if they do assign a mark, we have sent that mark, but then we've sent what our full request is as well. And I think it's important that we do submit a budget, which is what this requires, because I mean the mayor has the exclusive authority to propose a budget in the district under the home rule charter. So, I mean, it makes sense for us to be required to send a budget to the mayor because it's got to be incorporated into the budget. But this here is silent in terms of whether we have to participate in the mark process or not. It just says, that we have to send annual estimates of the expenditures and appropriations that are necessary for the operation of the board. So the way I would read what's written here is that let's say that they give us a mark. I think we would choose whether or not to send that mark. Typically we have because we want to be team players in the process, but I don't know that it's required or not. But what this says is that we have to also submit what we feel is necessary for us to function. So if we received a mark that we didn't feel was necessary for the operation of the board, we would then have to also submit what we do believe is necessary under the statute. So I think this is written well here. I mean, the way we've treated independent agencies, I think, has varied over time. But usually I think that they should get greater discretion, in terms of putting in the budget. I remember when I was budget director for the mayor, we would give the council whatever they requested as their mark. We would never change it, but they would have to live with it if they looked greedy, if they were being very frugal, whatever the consequences of that, we would put that upon the council to make that decision because they made up a relatively small portion of the budget. At the time, I think we extended the same courtesy to the state board, but we did not have a independent OAG at the time, so it wasn't really relevant for OAG because that was a subordinate DC agency. So I think this is perfect the way it's written, in my opinion, because it doesn't address whether we do or don't have to abide by the mark process, which I think the mayor, since the mayor can submit whatever he or she wants with the budget, it doesn't matter one way or the other. But we should be submitting an annual budget. I don't know if that's helpful, if that helps clarify anything.
I mean, I think it's helpful. So I don't disagree that we should be submitting an annual budget. Like that just makes sense as far as information the mayor would need to just do the fuller budget and all the things. But I think what I am thinking about is in the last few years, it's not like we are essentially the mayor's office comes to us and tells us what our mark should be, right? Instead of us saying this is what our mark is. And then they have also kind of limited, as you know, Representative Goulet, and in the admin meetings, like the ways we can categorize things in the budget process. So for example, and I'm not going to be perfect about this because it's not in front of me, how they were like, you can have 3 enhancements and they have to be categorized into these different things, right? And I'm just curious, I guess it wouldn't appear in statute, but like, is that in some way contradictory to what this describes, right? Not the providing of the budget, but like limiting our ability to say, this is what our mark should be, this is what's good for us, and how we then can participate in the budget process. I don't know I feel like I'm not doing a good job, but I'm trying to think through and describe what I've experienced. And
Well, I think you're describing it perfectly. And, for me, I share a bit of the frustration that a small agency that is independent like ours, is given such strict guidelines on this. I wish there was more discretion given to us in that regard. Although I do think the statute, hits it perfectly because right now it states that we should submit a budget that we feel is meeting our needs. So that means we might submit 2 budgets each year, one which would be participating in the mark process, and then another one that we feel is our budget request and what we feel meets our needs. And I think we should send both. I think it's required here that we send a budget that adequately funds the board. And I just think that the mark process, I think, will be different for each mayor. I think it's procedural, but it's not something you'd speak to in statute, because the only thing in statute that is clear to me is that the mayor's got the exclusive authority to propose the budget each year. So they can set whatever process, they want. We could say we refuse to participate in it, but that's not really going to be helpful one way or other, because the mayor can arbitrarily then assign a number to the agency in her proposed budget. So let's say we refuse to participate. I mean, they could submit whatever they want. They could cut staff. They could increase staff. So I think this is good the way it is, in my personal opinion. I don't think that's an issue that's going to be able to be legislated.
okay, sorry, I gave you all the disclaimer that I'm not eating today, so I'll be on camera shortly. But so I tend to agree, and my practice has been that we of course participate, because I don't want arbitrary decisions being made on the board's behalf. I am wondering if maybe, as we think about what comes out of this committee, we note that the statute, like what the statute says, but also that, and we will recommend that future iterations of the board actually submit like the 2 budgets or something like that. Like if there's a discrepancy, like between if the procedural process outlined by the mayor in some way does not allow us, or or constrains us from being able to put forth a budget that meets our needs, that we should actually participate in the process, but we should also submit a budget that reflects our needs, like just for the record, because we do have the right to do that.
Yeah, I think we're required to do it even. So, I mean, does the language in the code, I mean, it makes me comfortable. It says that we're required to submit annual estimates of the expenditures and appropriations necessary for the operation of the board for the year. So I feel like it's really pretty well covered, and actually requires us to put out what we feel is necessary. So even if we get a mark that we feel is inadequate, we would then also, be required to also send, as part of that submission, what we do feel is necessary. Now, they could choose to not include it. They could choose to include less, but I think it's already pretty well spelled out here. I mean, would you recommend any changes to the language?
No, I don't think I'm recommending changes to the language of the statute. I think I'm more so recommending whatever we like in our committee report, or whatever comes out of this committee, that we note that, because in my experience, being on a couple different admins and, you know, having different experiences with different executive directors and in leadership, I don't think that folks are actually understanding what the statute says. And I think it's really important to preserve and kind of give folks a reference of saying like, hey, we know the mayor can recommend, whichever mayor can recommend a process from year to year. However, our responsibility is this. And so we should both like participate in the process because, you know, practically, we don't want arbitrary decisions being made on our behalf. And we should, per statute, also be responsible for submitting, you know, just our best actual cost and, you know, projections, right? Because sometimes those things sometimes the process can be in conflict with what our responsibilities are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
That sounds fine to me. What are the other parts that seemed in conflict?
I had one, but Ebony Rose, do you want to finish up yours first?
No, I'm happy to keep chewing. Go ahead, Representative Boulay.
Okay, so it wasn't on here, and I think the reason it got missed maybe because it wasn't on there, but it was something I caught when I was doing the nurse legislation. Was if you go to I'm not saying you need to do it right now, Darren, but because I can read it for folks. But just if you could make a note, Darren, it's section 38 621. It's over in the another portion of the code, and it would be subsection G. So I want to read the language off. I think we just need to repeal this because I don't think it's applies anymore. It says beginning with the fiscal year 1991, the responsibility for implementation of this act shall be transferred from the Department of Human Services to the Board of Education. And it involves implementation of nurses, athletic trainers, things of that sort, and medical coverage. And then it's got another provision in subparagraph E that talks about the risk of injury for the superintendent of schools of DCPS in consultation with the Department of Health and approved by the Board of Education. So I think in this section, also that would be E1 and then capital letter E. I think those are provisions that just may need to be refreshed because I don't think that's within our purview anymore, nor really should it be.
That's probably not even referring to the State Board of Education, right? That's referring to a prior
Yeah, it was
entity that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it was the old iteration, the old Board of Education. So I think it probably should either be DC Health, possibly OSSI, but having us be charged with that doesn't really make sense to me. So I think maybe what we do is we just have a meeting with either OSSI or DC Health and just decide how this language should be written.
So just a quick question. That would be separate from the DC code and the three recommendations that we're looking at for this. This is for the nurse bill that we were transmitting.
No, I just saw it in the nurse bill. I didn't try to go clean it up because I felt it wasn't really germane to that bill. Uh, I think it would be germane to this bill because what we're doing is we're just trying to remove outdated references, to the old Board of Education. And I think and this probably would have been something they would have cleaned up a while ago if it was in the OSSI statute, or in the State Board of Ed statute. But I think since it was over there in these health statutes, nobody picked up on it. So it's really just a technical amendments matter. So if we're just trying to be thorough, I think we should just clean it up with this for doing something. But again, it's 38 621 is where the language is.
And it's possible that there are other such references. Like you didn't do a comprehensive search, you just happened on this.
I just happened upon these. I think it's quite possible. There's other references to the old Board of Education, floating around the DC code somewhere, but I have not tried to do an exhaustive search of those, I'll fully admit. And you know, and things like this get caught all the time, and council does a periodic technical amendments act where they'll you know, clean up the code where they find these outdated provisions. So, I mean, it even could be done through that process probably.
All right.
That all sounds reasonable to me. I'm happy to flag the other things that I just had questions about. So starting from,
Do you want to do this SES?
yeah, that's the one I was gonna flag. So I guess that's 9. So I don't believe, so I remember when we had SES, supplemental education service providers. I'm not even sure SES is even still a program federally, as this was pass-through money. And so I think this is something that just needs to be like stricken altogether.
So which paragraph was it? I'm trying to.
It's 9. Wait a minute, let's see which page. Make sure I'm in the right document. I have it on my screen. It's under functions of the board, that document. But it's the 9th function of the board.
Is it approved state policies for supplemental education service providers operating in the district?
Yep, approved state policies. Yes, that one. And then there's also 11, which is approve the list of charter school accreditation organizations. Do we do that? I'm curious, since PCSB is the authorizer, if that's something we actually are doing, or if anybody's doing it. Because I don't ever remember us having a conversation around accreditation for charters.
Well, this is just saying the accreditation organization. So could it be that at one point we approved like the organization that accredits charters, even though we don't directly approve the accreditation of the charters, do we approve the entities that do accredit them?
Right, but I guess I'm so like, yeah, like the middle states or the other groups that do it. I'm just wondering if given that if this is something that we are actually still responsible for, given some of these changes were made, this statute was written before the PCSB was in existence, or if the PCSB is actually doing this, because I cannot remember a time where the state board actually even engaged in something like this. And I know that, you know, just like there are different consortiums, things change. Just like Park was a consortium that was really popular for state assessments, and that's now changed. And so I guess I'm just flagging it as something we might want to check to see if, you know, we should be paying more attention to this and we should be doing this on some type of cadence, or if it's actually a function that the PCSB is also performing. Because I don't know of anyone who's actually doing this.
I agree. It's probably not something that has to happen often, but I wouldn't give it up.
I just don't want to take for granted that anybody's even paying attention, right? Like, yeah. I'm not suggesting that we just say, "Oh, give it away." I'm flagging it as a responsibility we never talk about.
Could we have as a solution to it? Could we have Darren check with the Public Charter School Board to see if they're doing this right now? Because maybe then there's a conflict in the code. If that was approved later in time, maybe they were awarded conflicting authority with us, and they're performing it right now. But it could be also, if it's something that's a rare function, perhaps no one's doing it, and we should be doing it. Or it could be that the last time we did it, those organizations are still the ones that have been approved, and you know, it was done many years ago, and it's not been needed to be reevaluated since that time because we've kept the same accrediting organizations. So I think if we just check, that might be good. Darren, could you just check with them and see if that's something they're doing?
Mhm.
And then if they are, then we could talk about how we clean up the statute, or reconcile the conflict. And if they're not doing it, we could find out whether or not it is something that we should be doing. Or if it's just something that comes along once in a blue moon and it's not necessary. On the other one, you mentioned there, Representative Thompson. I'd also be interested in that, but maybe we would want to check with OSSI because we're here just approving the state policy. So I would assume this would be OSSI that would be transmitting to us state policies for whatever supplemental education service providers are required to meet. So again, I think OSSI would be drafting these standards and sending them to us for approval. So would it make sense for us to check then with OSSI to see if they've been
Yeah,
submitting these to
because
us?
it is it would be a pass through Aussie as far as, but I guess I'm noting that I'm not even sure SES is even still a thing, right? Like these were providers. I feel like this was under NCLB, and we don't have NCLB anymore. So SES is no longer a thing. Is my assumption, but I want to double check that.
I support that, definitely.
And so those were my things where I was like, okay, what those were all of my cleanup items in the document.
Does anyone else have anything or would like a moment just to go through the document and point anything else out? And if you don't have access to this, I can share the link in the chat.
No, I read through it. It looks good to me. I didn't see anything else that really needed to be corrected. But I appreciate Representative Thompson flagging those two because I wasn't aware that we hadn't done those in some time.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should check into those, see if any further follow-up is needed. But otherwise, I think it's okay.
Can I tell you all a delayed thought that I'm now having, since I mentioned SES and NCLB? Since this statute, okay, I need to organize my thoughts. Since we now have ESSA, and we are no longer governed by NCLB, I wonder, since ESSA transmitted so much of the decision making to the states, if there are other things outside of the accountability framework that we should be thinking around. I haven't looked at ESSA in some time, but like this clearly was written to reflect the responsibilities that state boards should have during NCOB. And I don't know if anyone ever looked again. And so if there are things that are missing or should have been added, I think would be my curiosity. And maybe that's a NASB question.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's something NASB or we could reach out to NASB or ECS, Education Commission of the States, to see if there are things that are like typical state board responsibilities that aren't, reflected in our statute. But there's like as I think about it now, having read it and then like made a couple of notes, I'm like, oh, this was written clearly in the time of NCLB, which was a different time.
I'd be very interested in seeing what we came up with for those and discussing them. So I think that's a valuable activity. So I'm on board with looking at that.
Maybe so I'm marking that down as something that staff could follow up on, but maybe in the same breath, we could also ask um what that might look like work-wise, like if we have the capacity to do
Yeah.
work like that, and what goes into that. Or
Mhm.
if we would need additional funding for like a third party or something like that.
Yeah, that I think that's a really good, always important point, Darren, just about capacity. And as I think about the short term work around this capacity, that's why I'm suggesting we should lean on NASB and Education Commission of the States, because they should already have some information around what's been aggregated around state board responsibilities and where commonalities are.
Darren, I don't want to get us off track, but the one, and let me know if this is flowing out of order or messing up the flow of this discussion, but did we ever really settle upon kind of what we talked it through, I know at length, but on the initiating of policy, that was the one area that I still, I think had some concern or unreadiness about specifically. And had we settled on language on that, or kind of where was that in the process? If you could kind of update us. But if we want to finish this discussion first, uh, then I don't want to jump around. So let me know what you think, how that flows in.
Yeah, that if we jump on that, that's separate from the DC code. So we do have, I guess an update for that would be that I shared out a shared document that we could go into and start putting together language for then the wider board to react to at the working session. As far as I know, nothing has been added to it yet, but I could share my screen and jump to that as well. That's my only update on that.
If it's helpful, Representative Goulet, so I think, so I know Darren put in the chat, so we had 2 agenda items for this meeting. One was to go through the cleanup items, and 2 was to talk about the recommendations themselves, and any further, I would say, conversation around operationalizing and what it would look like. I know one of the things that I recall from our discussion at our last meeting that you raised was about like capacity and how we would structure, request and, what it means to be able to say like, hey, somebody else do this work, which no, I don't think we settled on any of that.
Okay.
But I believe there is space for that in this agenda today. And I don't know. I think part of Darren's question was, does anyone else do people have anything else on the code cleanup? If not, then we can jump back to the recommendations. I don't have anything else. I put all my things out there.
Yeah. I'm good. I'll be glad to get language on that.
Was that a thumbs down, Robert? So Representative Henderson so I'll take that as a nothing else.
Nothing else.
Oh,
Sorry
okay.
about
Not boo. That's a bad.
that. No.
I'm all set too.
Okay.
Did anybody have any questions about this standards for homeschooling? Is this another question we'd like to ask NASB? The number 15.
I mean, I think that should be within our purview.
Okay.
I mean, I would come from OSSI, we would probably approve it like we would other standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could see how the charter school that there might be a conflict there with the public charter school board. So that one made sense.
It shouldn't be though. I mean, I would imagine it. Well, let me say, when I say it shouldn't be, why do you say there might be? What am I?
Oh, like if they're already approving it and we're like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Like, is there a conflict of state statute or something like
The
that?
charters shouldn't be doing homeschooling, should they? I would think that would be
Oh,
exclusively us.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were jumping back to the charter school
Oh,
board.
no.
No, for this one, the state standards for homeschooling, it's just something that if there is something that we're missing, like if this is coming up and we're just missing it, like what does that look like? How does that
Yeah.
should we be initiating those conversations? We do get emails every now and again about homeschooling, and it's come up maybe once or twice a year. So just what does that look like, and if we
I do remember this surfaced a bit during the pandemic, especially when more folks were moving to homeschooling. I think similar to any of the other policy uh, responsibilities we have, we don't have the responsibility of initiating, right? And so, one of the things that I think uh, is helpful is getting a sense of what is how often like what is timely, let me put it that way, like are there and we've started this conversation with Aussie on different education standards, but like how often should we be looking at math, often should we be looking at health, are there certain like is a cadence for science different than a cadence for social studies? So what I don't have a good sense of is how often we should be looking at something like the homeschool standards, and or if um not if and how, what is their relation to when we make changes in other standards? So like we just passed SEL, we did social studies, we did a health addendum. One question I would have is if those things, how that, what is the relationship between the education standards writ large and the homeschool standards? Or if there is something that we should be doing to make sure there's alignment there. I will note Representative Henderson switched to his phone and needs to be re-promoted to panelist.
Thank you. Okay, he should be jumping on shortly. I see Representative Henderson is on. Shall I switch to the next document? So we did have for the DC for the code DC code. Did you want to do anything or dive into this at all, or shall we just switch to the recommendations?
I'm good with the code things. I'm happy to talk about the recommendations if everyone else is.
Yeah, I mean, this all looks accurate in here, Darren. I don't think we should be changing any of this because this is going through the history of kind of the board's transition from a, you know, the old Board of Education to the State Board of Ed. So I think all of this is just describing history, and I think that they've intended to leave it in for those purposes. So
Got it. Okay, yeah, I have those in the notes as well. Thank
because
you.
like even the staggering of the 2 and 4 year terms there, it was intended to make sure that you didn't have all the board being elected at once, and then it eventually shifted by statute over to members in each ward versus kind of zones of 2 wards. So I think it looks good to me, that stuff.
Okay, great. I'm gonna put it back in the chat. Um, the recommendations draft is now in the Zoom chat. But I'm also sharing my screen, so we could go these as well in here as well, and I could try to capture any thoughts on these or feedback on these.
I mean, I'm glad to start. If anybody else wants to go first, though, feel free. Okay, I'll start then. So, the Representative Thompson, I think, and Representative Henderson talked me into yeah, the institutional value of recommendations 1 and 4 on here. A recommendation 2, I still have some unease about, and I think it's really still born out of a concern of overloading OSSI with too many requests and having safeguards in place to prevent that. I just don't see a need at this time for us to be initiating policy. And I feel like if we really feel like we've reached an impasse with some future version of OSSI where they're refusing to move standards in a timely fashion, or there's some true problem in terms of them not being cooperative with us is the one who's approving the standards, we could always send it down as a bill. But, although on the other hand, I'm hesitant to include council in this because I feel like this is one of our, one true roles. So it would be kind of nice, uh, if we didn't have to send a bill to council to then initiate this. But uh, I think where I ultimately stand on this is I just don't know that we've proposed safeguards that are sufficient to prevent a future iteration of this board from sending too many requests to OSSI. And it's not just that OSSI wouldn't have time to do the work, but I would fear that it could be rushed. Like if we have OSSI pumping out a bunch of standards to meet some artificial deadline that a future state board sets, would we even have the capacity, and not we as in the current board, but a future board to really give the type of public process that I feel has been beneficial uh, with our standards that we've approved to do this. And I'm just generally don't think this is helpful, and I don't see a current problem that really necessitates this change. So I'm still uneasy about recommendation two and concerned about the safeguards. Uh, Therefore, I do have overall kind of a comment on how I'm going to react to this, this legislative initiative, which I can talk about now or later
Can I ask a question? Because representative recommendation two has two parts. One is about amendments, because currently, we vote up or we vote down, and the other is about initiation. Do you have concerns about, or thoughts, not concerns, I would say broader thoughts about the ability to amend?
I'm supportive of that. I do support the ability for us to amend it and not just vote up or down. I think we should make sure we don't have to adjust other provisions to give ourselves that authority, but I would support that ability to propose amendments to the provisions. I mean, but I think again, we got to make sure I'll tell you what my unease is with it,
Mhm.
and it's
Yeah, I
nothing.
mean, I
Yeah,
just wanted to make sure I just wanted to clarify, right? Like, because it does have that. This is one of the ones with two parts to it, and
yeah.
one is so I do think I understand the capacity, because I'm always like, how do we actually get the thing done that we say we want to do? Um, but I don't and I don't think we've laid that out yet. So I do think it would be prudent for us to just talk about what would be needed for us to do this, what it could look like to operationalize, and if we can't come up with something sensible, um, I understand that lands us in a place where it's like maybe this is not a responsible thing to do. But I think I'm currently in a space where it's like we should it's worth having the exercise of thinking about what it could look like. Because I don't know what it could look like. But I also don't want to, yeah. But I'm also, yeah, I think that's where I am for number two.
I mean, I'll react to that. I think that's a great point, Representative Thompson. And I think my concern with the ability to amend is that, like, I'm looking down the road, not our
Mhm.
board, because I think we really have thoughtful people on it, but envisioning a situation where even after deliberative process, members of the board felt like they didn't get their items on a list for new standards. And then you have people starting to approve like a number of new standards and amending it to add new things, beyond really the capacity for, our educators to teach those standards. So, I mean, one good thing about having kind of just the up or down process that we have right now is that it's got to really be a product of compromise And I didn't get everything I wanted in there, but Aussie was really responsive and included most of the things that I requested, with each of these that we've done. And I just I'm just uneasy about any process that would allow the board to theoretically, even 5 members of the board, to put a bunch of items on our teachers and our educators that really would potentially create a burden that couldn't be realistic. And maybe that's not a concern that should be a concern, but it is to me. So I'll put it
Oh,
out there.
well, I wouldn't say it's a concern that shouldn't be a concern. I do think of our authorities also as having responsibilities. And we have a structure where we are not, we might approve policies, but we are not the ones that implement them. And we're not the ones who do who support the educators, who deal with the implementation or the rollout. I do think we've done a good job of asking questions and encouraging OSSI to think about capacity and implementation and how we can see things through with fidelity. But I recognize that is not in our purview completely. And while we are majority rule, but I do think it's a real thing to say, okay, well, if folks can just tack on stuff, I don't mean it like that, but you know what I mean. Then it hasn't. What does that mean for the actual rollout? And I tend to share and appreciate when you say it's not necessarily like, I don't think we're supposed to think about the personalities at any given time, right? At any present time or even past time, because we don't, it's about the institution. It's not about the individuals and what's good for us as an institution, but also what's good for the other institutions in the ecosystem. And so I think that's why I am saying, I think it's important to think through what it would what it would look like to operationalize any of these things. Not because I'm saying that means that we got to create something so it could work, or that we have to create something to prove it can't work. But I do think it's responsible to think through, okay, and be able to say, here's what this means, or here's what it would mean. Yeah, so I don't think I say all that to say as I'm clearly thinking out loud, but I don't think it's something to not be concerned about. I do think it is responsible to raise how things can go right or how things can go wrong. And it should be part of our discussion.
And let's say there's something that 5 members of the board feel so strongly about, either something that we feel shouldn't have been included, or something that we feel should have been included. And it elevates it to a level of concern where the board isn't going to approve it. I mean, that's the board's choice to vote it down and say to OSSI, this is a deal breaker for us. This needs to be in what you send to us. And we have that power. Like if it's something that really is something that 5 members feel strongly about, we have the ability to say no until it's submitted in there. And I think that's a pretty powerful standard. I mean, it would be something that we would have to care deeply about, but it's a way we can still force amendments to this if we're unsatisfied that OSSI's left something out that's truly important. And I just don't know. I'm very concerned about the alternative where you have 5 members, each of which want, something in the standards, getting together and saying, well, if you support this, I'll support that. If you support this, and then you get, 5 things dumped in there, and really none of which really needed to be in there in the first place, but people kind of trade ideas, and it ends up with the Christmas list getting included in the standards, by the state board. And I wouldn't dare suggest it would be anyone here doing that, but I could see it as a potential, problem that could arise in the future. And I think this is was it a problem in search of a solution or a solution in search of a problem? I don't really think this is a real problem. And I think we've got the power already to uh, both collaborate with OSSI. If we really feel the need we're being disrespected, we could send a bill to council. And if we feel that they've really left something out of the standards or included something that's offensive, we can always reject the standards and say we won't approve it until it's changed. So I just still don't feel this one's necessary, neither the amendments or the initiation, because I just feel it opens up Pandora's box to a host of problems, and there's no real discernible need for this right now, in my opinion.
I know, I'm about to say, I know Representative Henderson is off camera, so it's harder to jump in.
Sorry. But to that point, you brought up the example of if 5 members feel strongly enough to reject a proposal, they can do that. But because we can't initiate policy, that means OSSI can just pull it all together, and there's no assurance that it would come back. So it really does, take away an ability if that were to happen. And if I could go back to the first point, now I'm forgetting what the first point was. The initiating policy.
Mhm.
Representative Goulet, you were saying that there aren't safeguards currently to prevent like overloading. Can you imagine, are there safeguards that you could be comfortable with, or are you just saying you probably wouldn't be comfortable regardless?
I think what would be helpful is having a fiscal impact process and some sort of agreed upon timeline for this. Uh, because what I would be worried about is that, let's say OSSI is experiencing a staff shortage or something of that nature, had somebody go out and, we start approving a bunch of new standards that they have to write. Uh, do they have the staff capacity to do that? Because right now we kind of have a plan, that I guess we're going to probably discuss at the retreat of what the general order of looking at these things are. And what I would be very concerned about is that we'd overload. So if there was like at least some sort of fiscal impact statement that was provided with it, I think that would give me more comfort. And then also, I think setting a timeline for which they would have to respond with the standards, because I could easily see a scenario where, again, you have multiple people wanting multiple things, and then OSSI gets hit with a bunch of requests, to approve this. And maybe the answer to that's a super majority of the board have to approve it. So you don't have, it makes it harder to vote trade to send a bunch of things to OSSI. But to me, I just honestly on this one, I just haven't seen an issue where this has been a problem. So I really am reluctant to change us from somebody who's approving policy to somebody who's, because if we can amend, we're making policy. We're no longer just approving policy. We're making policy, and we would need to change that in our statute. And I just I don't see the need to fix a system that's already working. And I mean, if we could think of examples where there's been really a problem, I'd love to hear them. But I just look at this last 2 years, and it seems like there's been a back and forth of respectful communication and a timeline that's made sense. And we've been able to use that timeline to engage the public in a way that I think the public has appreciated, and that's made the product stronger each time. And credit to President Thompson, for her role in that. She pushed back on things when OSSI was trying to move a timeline that we didn't feel was giving us the time or the public the time. You, as president, pushed back on OSSI to get on a timeline that made sense for us. So I just see it as a process that's working well, and I don't think it needs to be changed. But that's kind of where I stand on it.
Well, my 2 cents would be that in part, like it would lead us back to going through the council. Like if there is policy that we would like to see, it would leave us with that being our only real option to go through the council, which I mean, sometimes that happens, sometimes it works. It would be nice if there was another option, in my opinion. And I don't think that any of these powers would end the process of collaboration and compromise. I think that would still just be part of uh, the work of it. And ultimately, like our accountability is as a democratically elected body, and that is kind of that's what gives us our parameters. Is my thought. But I just wanted to add that.
Well, I I'll tell you what's happening in my head. I do, and where to start? So one, I want to go back to the frame of it not being about uh individuals and more so about what is good for the institution. I will say that with the and maybe and I think I'm arriving in a place of maybe it's one or the other. Like I think I feel more strongly about the ability to initiate. I think than I do the ability to amend, and I'll tell you my thought process around this. Um, I have used the example of the financial literacy standards before, and I think that's something we should have done a long time ago. I also think that because there was interest from council in many ways, that actually hindered the process instead of being helpful to the process. Because what the council didn't do was the council didn't go to OSSI and say, hey, we want you to do this. What council members did was they tried to legislate on their own. And what was said was, well, we don't trust that OSSI will actually do it. And if they were going to do it, they would have done it by now, and all the different things. And I um, tend to be consistent in saying I don't love it when council members are legislating um, education, like curriculum, what classes folks should take, all the different things. And so I have seen often what the council has done at times, and the same thing for attendance, right? When and both of these things have been both of these examples are on my purview as a board member, but there was some really not thoughtful attendance legislation that almost came out. And instead of them going, hey, OSSI and state board, we ask you to take this up in a timely fashion, what folks did was they tried to put their own stuff out there. And so that's my, I think that is why I lean more towards like initiation being important. However, I do also, and I think I'm consistent in this way as well. I'm a how person. Like it matters to me how things are done and that things are done well. So what I would never want is just a laundry list of folks saying like, "Oh, I believe this should be done," and we start to just applaud folks making demands instead of work getting done. Which is probably why I'm also saying I would like us to think about what it would look like. Like, would it mean that you need a supermajority? Would it mean a supermajority plus some type of impact statement? Would it mean like fiscal impact or some type of like there should be some type of process that talks about what it would actually take to get the mandate done. Because I don't love unfunded mandates in general. And I don't want to just put stuff on people's plate that we don't manage. Because then it also doesn't get done. And so I do feel more strongly about the initiation. I also think it addresses the could it come back up again? Um, I am less tied to the amendment on the dais because I think it means that I think instead of not just the I hear you, Representative Goulet, about the vote trading. I'm more concerned about things that haven't gone through as public of a process being added at the last minute. So like, let's say somebody we all know, like, and respect comes up and talks to 6 members and it's like, can I get this thing in there? And it seems like a good idea, but it could be a surprise to the public because it just goes through our regular amendment process, right? Like, I don't think that's the way the best policy is made. And so I would feel more comfortable and I feel more strongly about being able to initiate with some type of very thoughtful, stringent process. Because I think that is how you say, okay, the public can be heard, we can help move work along, and we are not creating some type of almost like mudslide of things that fall down on OSSI. So like I do feel more strongly about the initiation, and would like us to think about what operationalizing that could look like. I feel less strongly about the amendment, quite frankly. And I hear and appreciate your concerns about the capacity, Representative Boulay, but that's also why I'm saying, like, we should be really thoughtful in what that could and should look like. I don't think it should just be, hey, let's vote, make OSSI do this. Like, I don't think that's the right tact.
I think I agree with both of the things you said, and Representative Thompson, particularly, the idea of the vetting. I think that I had something I hadn't even considered, but the idea of, an amendment maybe sneaking in that sounded really good, but didn't get the full light of the public process. I think that's another reason why, in my mind, there's no need to pursue the amendments. On this issue, perhaps I hear you on the initiation point, and I think you've made some really good points on it. What if we set something up where, first we were required to send a request to OSSI to do it, like within a certain period of time. And if they don't respond to that, then I would support, and it's got to be a reasonable period of time, like maybe a 1 or 2 year window to like agree to look at a standard or something like that, that the board feels is important. So maybe what we would do is request by resolution, that they look at it. If they don't look at it within a period of time, then I would support something to require them to, but within then like a 2 year window. Because if there are things already in the queue and in the works, we'd want to be mindful of that. And then also that would give at least a full budget cycle. So if staffing was required to do something, it would provide an opportunity to make that available. So, I'd support like kind of a two-step process on this. One, having some sort of request being made for them to do it, where we're not initiating, but we're requesting. And that could be something as simple as a letter. It could be a resolution of the board requesting that they look at something. So let's use financial literacy. And so let's say the board passed a resolution, requesting OSSI, look at financial literacy within a 1 or 2 year window. The males here, the dogs always alert me to that if I'm teleworking. And then let's say they refuse to do it or they don't do it, then I would support something then at that point that by a supermajority, we could vote to have them initiate that policy within a certain time window. So maybe within then 2 years they do it. And I know that seems long to some people because that could be a 3 year process on it. But, given the fact that, we do have a lot of standards and some are already in the pipeline, I think that's a reasonable window, and that might address your concern. So it'd be like basically we request it. If they refuse, we then have the power to, by a supermajority, require they do send something to us within 2 years or something like that. I don't know if that addresses your concern.
Well, so here's what I appreciate. I do appreciate. I like the idea of a two-step process because I like the back and forth and the dialogue around, hey, here's what we think, here's what you think. But also, like, I do think there should be some mechanism to say it's got to happen at a certain point, right? I also appreciate that, yeah, things don't happen quickly. And in some cases, we might need to build the capacity. And in other cases, it might not be something where building capacity is needed and could happen quickly. Like with the addendums to the health standards when we added the menstrual health, that took not very long, right? And so I do think those are healthy conversations to be having around what's coming down the pike, how are we prioritizing, and helps us just have a little more, I would say, responsible leverage around like what happens first, second, or third. Because in my, one of the things that I have actually put a lot of time and energy into is saying, hey, I see what's coming, how are we thinking about this, what's the queue look like? And honestly, they didn't, as president, they didn't have to tell me, right? And so I would come to the meetings, and I would always be happy when we have updates, but I don't take for granted that is, I think that was something that was really helpful and good. But I do think there should be some mechanisms to make sure that is like solidified as a practice. And there's nothing right now that solidifies that as a practice. So I could be in favor of something two-step, but this is also why I said I would like to talk about what it could look like to operationalize anything.
And Representative Thompson, the one point also that I really agree with you, and I should have said this earlier, is your concern about the council getting too heavily involved in this. I mean, it's one of the few problems the state board has, and I could easily see just the same problem we're talking about on our end of overwhelming OSSI with these things. I would be equally concerned about suddenly the council deciding to pass, one standard after the next, on OSSI. I mean, you do have the fiscal impact statement as a checkpoint there, but if too many things are tried to be moved at once, you really can't have the type of public vetting of these.
Or individual coursework. Like I remember when I first came onto the board and we were well into the social studies process. And there was a council member who was like, I want to legislate that every kid takes African-American history. And while I love the idea of more African-American history and it being well and good, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, we're doing a whole process, right? And it shouldn't just be about one class. It should be about like the fuller educational trajectory. And so I've just seen some, behavior that I think is very well intentioned, but could have some adverse impacts. I see that in the chat. Representative Henderson noted he had to leave for his kids' celebration of learning, and that the amendments was not in the original report, and so he's fine with not tackling amendments and reverting to the original recommendation, which it sounds like we would want to put some firm guardrails around, or like we would want the board to discuss some guardrails around. At least that's where I am.
And just to add to that, if we raise this up with the wider board members, another maybe catch to the amendment aspect of that that I was just thinking about was OSSI is a state education agency, and so they have to follow guidelines and like federal rules and requirements. And so say we ask or want an amendment that does not work federally, like in terms of accountability, getting rid of a certain weight that is required, just having those guardrails in place. So that's like another reason why an amendment might be kind of
I think
trouble.
I think that's a really good point, Darren. Like I do, yeah. I hear folks, and I appreciate Representative Henderson reminding us that we're elected and all the things, and I do think we take that seriously. But I also want to make sure that we are creating processes that reinforce good policy making, transparency, our responsibilities, all the things. Yeah. So it sounds like the three of us are okay with removing the language around amendments, and that we're all in the same place on that, as far as maybe not the why, but that we're going to strike that. And Representative Goulet, I like your suggestion around a two-step initiation process.
Yeah. And I think this has been really helpful. I mean, should at some point, maybe we'd just wrap this part up, and then I just kind of want to talk broader about kind of my thinking of this, because I don't want to blindside you, Representative Thompson, or, I mean, I can talk to Representative Henderson about it, kind of where I stand on all of this at the retreat, if it comes up there. So,
Mhm.
I mean, just generally, I think here's what I would love to see come out of this. I would love to see us, prepare a report, with legislation, on it that I think we're really thoughtfully thinking through what, could work in a best world. Uh, so I'm going to forward to voting in favor of the report and whatever kind of legislation we have as an appendix on that. However, what I will do is vote against the transmission of the legislation to council right now, and I'll just explain why. I'm just still very concerned about the current congressional landscape. It's not been, my concerns have not been eased based on the chaos I've seen in recent days. I mean, it's very alarming uh,
Mhm.
to not be sure whether we're, having federal funds or not having federal funds and all of this. So what I would like to see us do is, I think, and we are doing that right now, is really thoughtfully thinking through what should be done on these. I'd like to double back with Aussie, and after we kind of come up with the draft, and hope we have a back and forth with them to see if there's anything we missed, and then if we can produce a report with like a really thoughtful bill with it, I'm prepared to vote for that out of committee and then vote for the report, but I'm going to vote against, as I said, transmitting any legislation to council, just simply because even if I agree with the concept of the bill generally, I just think the timing is just not right now. And it could be something in 2 years if Congress changes, or within 4 years that we decide to come back to. I just don't want to send anything, even if it's got a different title, on state board authority right now, because I think we need to lay low and try to focus on the powers we have right now. And I don't see any immediate need to change these things right now. But I think if we leave behind a thoughtful pathway of breadcrumbs through our report and through in our legislation, if things align differently at the federal level later, I think it would be good because we'd then have a roadmap that future board could than just simply introduce the bill at that time. So that's kind of where I am on it all. But I didn't want to blindside people with that approach because it seems a bit wishy-washy. But uh, I think it's really important that we do something thoughtful now, but then also wait on sending anything to council and then theoretically
Mhm.
Congress. So that's my 2 cents on it, and I'll leave it.
No worries. I mean, I understand. Like we are living through what has been already a really long few days and uncertain time. I get it. It feels to me like folks are just trying to dismantle federal government altogether, and so I get that, and I don't. I would say I personally don't feel more at ease than I did January 20th, right? And so I can definitely empathize with that sentiment. I do, and I think one of the things that's been important to me is our charge was to think it through. And I have really appreciated both you and Representative Henderson and your thoughtfulness around the things. Like I think we can produce something that is really thoughtful. And I know that we still have to share things with the full board. I don't pretend that just because the committee puts together something thoughtful that that's the thing that then becomes the thing that the full board adopts as it is. I would, hope they take our recommendations seriously, but I also know that life is only lived moving moving forward, right? And so we couldn't have anticipated all the things that are happening today, and we'll have to make some, I think, responsible decisions around how we communicate and what we communicate and what actions we take. But I do think it was prudent for us to be thoughtful in the what could be, right? Like I think we should. So I don't. I can understand. I'm disappointed. I think that this is just me, but in general, I am disappointed that certain actions we couldn't take when there was a more favorable climate. Just like, we talk about federally certain things like DC could have been the 51st state, maybe at a certain point in time, right? And there are consequences for that. But I get that this is a particularly tenuous and uncertain time, and we all have our anxieties, and so I don't. I can understand that, and I just appreciate both of you all as committee members being thoughtful, and look forward to us as a board continuing to be thoughtful in how we handle conversations like this.
And I think we're going to produce something really that is high quality. I think this has been amazing working with you, Representative Thompson, and Representative Henderson on this. And I think we've made a lot of headway in terms of thinking this through. And I think what we produce in terms of a report, that may include an attached bill with it, I think is going to be really high quality and something that, I mean, maybe the board will want to transmit now, but I'm just too uncomfortable with that. But it will be there waiting. If we choose not to have a supermajority of members want to send it to council, it'll be there waiting, when the situation makes sense, and we'll put the hard work in to really think through it. So I think this is not a exercise that's useless. I think it's really a thoughtful exercise to kind of close the loop on this, and then uh, and I can only speak for myself on it. I just don't think it's worth it to do right now, but I think it could be valuable in the future to have it, and it'll be there. Darren, you'll hopefully be around, long after I'm gone from the board to,
I
to
hope so. Yeah.
recommend it.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll be a board member who puts this through then. So I just don't want to you do anything that rocks the boat right now.
I appreciate the honesty, right? Like I tend to always appreciate honesty. And I think that these are the things that, we grapple with when we make policy, right? And I get that. I do, and I'm also just committed to taking things like one step at a time. And I believe that when we started our first meeting, that was the thing that I was like, okay, like this is what our charge is. Let's kind of take it one day at a time, one thing at a time. And if we come up with something thoughtful, that's great. I think we can do that. And if we start to dig in, and it tends, and we find out this is not right, then that we will have to lift up what we learned, saying like the answer is no. But so I feel pretty good about the conversations we've had and what we'll be able to lift up. And I'm committed to continuing to take this conversation like one step at a time.
So I guess are we presenting something at the retreat then on this, or just updating folks on it?
I think we are supposed to update folks at the next working session.
Next working session. Okay, I
Mhm.
got it. I was worried it was tomorrow. So I
Mhm.
looked through the agenda, but I wasn't clear if this was something that we were discussing as part of that timeline of these standards. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine as we start to talk about committee work, it could come up as like hey, here's where this stands. But our next report out to the fuller board would be the working session.
Okay, that eases my mind, because I was worried we needed to be prepared Saturday to
Mhm.
discuss. So
And
okay.
Saturday is not tomorrow.
All
Even
right. I'm trying to
even
wish
though,
away
listen,
Friday. I'm
these
trying to wish
days,
away Thursday and Friday of the week, I guess.
these days feel like dog years. Like it's I told a friend of mine, I said, I'm starting my new year today. I'm on Lunar New Year time because this month I need a refund. Like I send it back.
We'll just start over today. Start
Send it
today.
back.
Yeah,
Send
I'm a
it back.
snake. I'm a snake, so this is my auspicious year. So I'm all set. So
Well,
Hey,
I'll let you live your auspicious year. I believe I'm a rabbit. And so I hear this is a lucky year for us, but I think every year is a lucky year for us because we're rabbits.
you're rabbits. So
the Chinese embassy always has like a Chinese New Year event. If you haven't been to that building, and it's in your ward,
I can just duck right over there,
walk
check it
over
out.
there.
So yeah, no, that would be fun, because Yeah, it only comes around once every 12 years. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
just
I don't know when my next time is, but Alistair gave me some Representative Chang,
sadly,
the way to my heart is food. And so he had these little snack cakes that he brought one day.
that's
So
nice.
delicious. I need to ask him about that because they were like a Lunar New Year treat. I feel like they had like some type of citrus something to them. I'm gonna inquire. And
And,
him in the most beautiful like red packaging.
and if you're a rabbit, I know when your year is because my son's a rabbit. So
Hmm.
he's a 2011 birthday. So that would make you let's see, it would be back in what 30 24 plus 11 35 2035. You got a while.
Ish. Yeah. Yeah. I got a minute.
Um,
I'll be back though.
just really quickly before we head out, we'll have this, I believe this working session is the last working session before our working group wraps up. I'll have to double check that.
What is the sunset date?
The sunset date, and that's the thing. I'm like thinking out loud because if if you don't mind, I'm sorry to like derail this or
No, no,
like
no. I
Uh,
mean,
it had ventured into the frivolous at that point. So
let me, I'm
we
gonna
we
pull it up
discussed all the important things.
right now. But while I'm looking that up, I'm just taking notes here and just making sure that I capture this correctly. We're just bringing what we discussed and next steps, but not a draft for the wider board to review. Or
And
do you want to work on something? I don't know if we have enough time to work on something for the board members to react to.
I think
well,
we're close on this.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just think we're pretty close to agreement on it. But
Mhm.
I mean, it's
I'm,
up.
I'm not so sure that there's a lot more that we need to do to be at least be able to present the ideas to the board. So I think that our next working session is the 5th. Is that correct? Um,
Our
February
next
5th.
working session is the 5th.
Uh,
Our sunset date for the working group is March 1st, before the March working session. So this will be the last working session to bring it to the wire board. Um, in that capacity, but then again, like maybe just sharing out um
Yeah.
what you
so
all raised.
here's my quick and dirty work plan recommendation is that I do feel like we are in a place where we can talk through each of the recommendations and share our thoughts and get feedback from the board at the working session. Like saying these are the places where we agree. Like so the things like number 2, striking the amendment, we think this is we should have a 2-step process, like that kind of thing. Get some feedback from folks. And then we can discuss any of that feedback. And we should be able to, now granted, we would have sunset, but I don't know if we would need another, like, I don't know if we have to extend. I think we can still, at our March working session, say, here's the report, right? Like, vote on it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we can get there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, and so I know with for this recommendation number 2, you were talking about the mechanisms. You would raise that and get feedback from members during that.
Yes, I think this working session, we should be able to say, here's what we've been discussing, right? Like, here's our thinking for each recommendation. And here are the places in the statute where we are either looking for more information or have a change around, right? Like, and for the most part, we're just looking for more information, like you know is anybody doing the accreditation stuff? Isn't like, right, like let them know what we're thinking, get their feedback to see if they have any thoughts on the recommendations. They might not. We should then be able to have a final working group meeting, and that'll be our last working group meeting where we say this is what we want in the report, and then we should be able to present the report at the March working session,
Mhm.
and then we're done.
Yeah. and we were supposed to have one next Thursday, a working group meeting.
Mhm.
Should we hold that, or is it, since it's only a week away, move it to the
Hold-
following Thursday?
I mean, I have it on here as the 6th. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'm fine with holding that because we would have just come out of the working session and then it would be fresh. And we can
That makes
just
sense.
say,
Yeah.
here's what else. And then that way too, if we, it's early enough in the month that if we need more time, we still have to hold on the 20th.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. And I think that works well. Because I think we can, after we present this to the board, we can reach agreement on these at the next meeting. And then finalize it. We may need another meeting, we may not, but then we can get the report finalized. And then submit that, even if the committee or whatever the working group has expired, we can still then present the report, which will
Correct.
move to the board. And we can, as members, individual members, talk about it. We don't, since there's not really a chair of this working group, I don't think there'd be like a procedural issue with that, because we would have voted it out and we sent it to them. And I think maybe we can even vote out something. I mean, maybe the right solution on this is we talk through the changes, we reach agreement on the substance on the 6th, and then we come back and formally vote out whatever we're going to submit on the 20th.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Is that
I support that, because that then gives, Darren and us 2 weeks to work out the specifics. And we vote on something specific more than we vote on a concept. And I think that is a better way to do it.
And
Yeah.
because this is a working group, we don't have to vote out anything on this. It would just be agreeing.
But since it is that's okay. That's helpful. But since it's publicly recorded, and, presumably we should all be in agreement on what we're sending over, at least then we have something formal that we can maybe even share with folks for comment. I would be fine with publicly sharing it if that's beneficial, even if it's not required. I think it would be good for purposes of transparency to kind of share.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Sorry.
No, I completely agree. That was my comment.
Lastly, I'll make sure to share out the 3 materials that we looked at today for the working session. So everyone will have printouts and be able to look at the comments in DC code and the 3 recommendations. Does that work for you all?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. I think that's a wrap.
There you go. All right. Well, Darren, thanks.
Well, have a good retreat. I'm gonna be in Florida, but
Oh,
I hope you all have a great.
I'm saying, oh, good for you, Darren.
Yeah, I have a wedding to go to, but I do need some color too. So it's that time. My Florida's calling me. I need to go to
Just
it.
don't get too ambitious. If you come back bright red, we're gonna know you should have gone a little heavier on the sunblock. So
That's fine. My nose is like super red in the cold. Like the last meeting on camera, my nose was like super red. Like it's too much. So like if it's too red, I'll just be off camera or something from Florida. But anywho, good to
All right.
see y'all. Thank you all so much.
safe travels to you, and we'll talk to you when you get back, hopefully with a nice suntan.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll try to bring treats too. See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.